Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are getting into something that is, honestly, it's a bit of a mind bender.
Yeah, it really is. It challenges, well, basically everything about how we perceive reality.
Exactly. So I want you to imagine, just for a second, spending your entire life believing that your mind is just fundamentally broken, like dangerously broken.
Right, 16 years of your life just navigating this absolute labyrinth of locked psychiatric wards.
Yeah, sterile hallways, psychiatrists giving you that agonizing look of pity mixed with just total clinical detachment.
And you're heavily medicated, right? Just a constant stream of pills to quiet the voices, the missing time, the hallucinations.
You've just accepted it. With this really devastating resignation, you believe you are profoundly mentally ill and that, well, then the ground just completely falls out from under you.
Because you discover the voice in your head isn't actually a fragmented piece of your own psyche at all.
No, it's an ancient 500-year-old vampire who has just been quietly sharing your consciousness this whole time.
It is such a terrifying premise because it completely obliterates the fundamental reality of the patient.
Oh, totally. Today we're looking at the world detailed in an excerpt from Amelia Atwater-Rhodes' book, Persistence of Memory. And the mission here is to unravel this really complex case study of a fractured identity.
Right, we're dissecting a scenario where a human identity and an immortal predator's consciousness are forced into this devastating literal collision. It is the ultimate nightmare of medical gaslighting.
It really is, and I think that's why it connects so deeply. You know, the horror isn't just, oh wow, vampires and magic are real.
No, definitely not.
The real horror is the realization of what it takes to actually trust your own mind, especially when every single authority figure in your life is telling you that you're wrong.
Armed with medical degrees, right? Diagnostic manuals, prescription pads.
Exactly. They are telling you that your lived experience is just fundamentally incorrect.
So we need to look closely at the architecture of Erin Misrahe's unraveling mind, because her baseline is just tragic.
Yeah, she's 16, living in Massachusetts with her dad, and she's been diagnosed with schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
And what's critical here is the sheer volume of psychopharmacology she is subjected to on a daily basis.
It's intense. She actually calls it a rainbow of pills.
Right, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety meds, heavy sedatives. The physiological load of that on a developing 16-year-old brain is just staggering.
Okay, let's unpack this because I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanism here.
Sure.
Because her doctors are looking at textbook symptoms of DI, right? They see dissociation, fugue states, alternate personalities with completely different skill sets.
But they are actively trying to cure a supernatural possession with human chemistry.
Yes.
Yeah.
How does that even interact? Like, what happens when you throw human meds at a magic problem?
Well, what's fascinating here is the clash of paradigms. Human psychotropics, they operate by altering neurotransmitter levels. You know,
Dopamine and serotonin.
it's exactly. Dopamine, serotonin, GABA. They're trying to suppress what the brain perceives as abnormal electrical firing.
But Erin isn't experiencing abnormal firing. That's the whole point.
Right. She is experiencing a secondary, profoundly powerful consciousness bleeding through a shattered psychic firewall.
Wow. So the medications aren't actually treating a disease at all.
No, they're acting as this really crude chemical dampener on an ancient magical frequency.
It's like trying to fix a haunted house by upgrading the electrical wiring, you know?
That is a great way to put it.
You can pump Erin full of tranquilizers all day long, but it doesn't change the fact that she's literally downloading lethal swordsmanship skills like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix.
Which is exactly what we see. And the friction between that human medical framework and the supernatural reality is most evident in her, well, her so-called savant abilities.
Right, because Erin is suddenly fluent in Italian, French, Latin.
She understands advanced biology and history that she was never even taught. And the medical establishment's reaction to this is incredibly telling.
They just brush it off, right?
Yeah, they do. They categorize it as a savant-like quirk of her madness. They force this massive anomaly to fit their existing diagnostic framework.
Because the alternative, that their whole psychological framework is obsolete, is just inconceivable to them.
Which isolates Erin completely. She has no one to validate her reality.
And let's talk about the fencing incident, because this is where that theoretical friction becomes incredibly physical.
Yes, Nefersham Public High School. Erin joins the fencing team at the urging of a girl named Marissa.
And Erin has never held a foil in her life. She steps onto the mat, and suddenly procedural memory just takes over completely.
But it's not her memory. I look at it as a complete bypass of the prefrontal cortex.
Wait, how do you mean?
Well, normally learning a complex physical skill requires active, conscious thought,
Hmm.
right? And then it transitions eventually to the basal ganglia for automatic muscle memory.
Like learning to ride a bike.
Exactly. But Erin skips the learning phase entirely. When the coach demonstrates the parries, she immediately understands their lethal applications.
Yeah, she registers which parry protects the liver, which one guards the throat, the heart.
And then she slips into that white noise mindset during the bout. Her conscious human mind completely drops out.
And this ancient survival instinct just takes the wheel. Survive first, lick your wounds later.
It's terrifying. She nearly guts a high school senior before the coach intervenes.
But what's really crucial here is the immediate aftermath, right? Because Erin suffers a massive panic attack.
Let's look at the physiology of that panic attack. Her body is completely saturated with heart-regulating anti-anxiety medications designed to keep her baseline artificially low.
Oh, wow, right.
So suddenly her nervous system is flooded with the extreme adrenaline and physical exertion of a 500-year-old warrior's combat response.
So her human heart and her chemical restraints are essentially going to war with this supernatural biofeedback.
Exactly. The meds are actually making the physical toll worse because her body is trying to operate at two completely contradictory extremes.
That is horrifying. And that leads right into the English class scene, which is just as bad psychologically.
Right, she spaces out during a lecture on Romeo and Juliet.
And she draws this hyper-accurate, anatomically perfect sketch of Romeo stabbing Tybalt.
And her teacher, who is also a licensed psychologist, immediately flags it as violent ideation.
The tragedy of the medical system here is that they genuinely believe they're protecting her.
They do. Dr. Tina Vaughn tells Erin her illness is a disease, that it's, quote, not who she is.
But the irony is suffocating, isn't it? The combat skills, the languages, the artistic precision, that actually is who is inside her.
Right. Every time Erin demonstrates undeniable proof of a secondary, highly educated consciousness, psychiatry basically punishes her for it.
Which trains her to become her own warden. She constantly measures her breaths, terrified of waking up the monster.
She is arguably the sanest person in the room. She's perceiving reality with terrifying accuracy, but she has been conditioned to constantly gaslight herself.
It's just devastating. But we have to look at the other side of this psychological prison, right? Where are these skills coming from?
We need to examine the predator whose consciousness is actually bleeding through Shevaun.
We have to cross the Atlantic and step into the shadows of France. And talk about a contrast.
Oh, absolutely. Night and day.
Erin is fragile, she's medicated, she's terrified. Shevaun is an ancient apex predator turned during the fall of the Byzantine Empire.
She travels with her lover, Adjila, who is a powerful Triste witch, and her vampire fledglings, Brittany and Iana.
She's a classical artist who despises modernism. She is basically untouchable.
Until the ambush in Set, France. And this is where the mechanics of the universe's magic system become incredibly important for us to understand.
Right. Shevaun is attacked by a group of hunters using shotgun shells laced with something called firestone.
And firestone isn't just physical shrapnel. It's a highly potent magical poison.
It's a blood-red crystal saturated with power from strong Triste witches, right? Designed to actively ravage a vampire system and feed on their dark power.
Yes. So to save her life, Adjila has to perform a really volatile magical procedure.
He uses his own Triste magic to completely suppress Shevaun's vampiric power so he can safely draw out the firestone.
But this vulnerability creates a massive problem.
I'm really struggling with the mechanics of this witch, honestly. Why does suppressing her vampiric power in France suddenly yank Erin's consciousness across the Atlantic Ocean into Shevaun's physical body?
Think of the psychic link between them as a pressurized tunnel. For 16 years, Shevaun's immense immortal power has been the dominant force.
Okay, so it's constantly, like, pushing against Erin.
Right, it's passively pushing against Erin's fragile human mind. That's why Shevaun's memories and skills bleed into Erin's daily life.
But when Adjila artificially suppresses Shevaun's power to 0 to extract the poison...
he creates a sudden, massive vacuum in that tunnel.
Oh.
So Erin's consciousness, seeking equilibrium, is violently pulled through the back door of the link to fill the void.
It's a metaphysical pressure equalization. That makes terrifying sense.
And it results in one of the most horrifying psychological scenes I can imagine.
Seriously. Erin, heavily medicated in her suburban bedroom, wakes up in France, in a vampire's body.
In the dark. Being intimately held by a man she does not know who is calling her Shevaun.
The psychological horror of this scene is just unmatched. The way Erin reacts is entirely grounded in her psychiatric trauma.
Exactly. She doesn't marvel at the magic. She doesn't ask about vampires or covens.
No, she violently rejects Adjila, screaming that she is a 16-year-old schizophrenic from Massachusetts.
Because to her, this isn't a fantasy adventure. This is the ultimate confirmation of her absolute worst fear.
That her violent alternate personality has finally taken over completely.
Right. She looks around the room and sees oil paintings, a dagger, and handcuffs on the bedside table.
And to a psychiatric patient with a history of violent restraints, handcuffs don't mean vampire kink.
Not at all.
They mean she has had a psychotic break so severe that she needs to be tied down to a hospital bed.
She literally begs Adjila to send her back to the psych ward. The sterile, locked doors of an institution make more sense to her than this gothic reality.
The visual confirmation is what really shatters whatever is left of her psychological defense.
Adjila forces her to look in the bathroom mirror.
And instead of her own short brown hair and hazel eyes, Erin sees tousled auburn hair and jet-black prismatic eyes where the pupil bleeds entirely into the iris.
It is absolute horror, and Adjila's response to her panic is completely devoid of empathy.
Right, he's a centuries-old witch. He realizes immediately that a human consciousness has invaded his lover's body.
He doesn't see a terrified, displaced teenager. He sees a parasite.
He twists her arm behind her back, pins her down, handcuffs her, and coldly threatens to knock her unconscious until the, quote, right person opens those eyes.
We have to consider the disparity in power and understanding here. Adjila's clinical brutality highlights the ethical void immortals often operate within regarding mortals.
Yeah, he treats her like a glitch in the system.
But we also have to extrapolate the profound horror this represents for Shevaun when she eventually regains control of her body.
Oh man, it's the ultimate violation of bodily autonomy for an immortal.
She has spent half a millennium being untouchable, an apex predator.
Finding out a fragile human girl hijacked her consciousness and walked around in her skin. Shevaun doesn't breathe or have a heartbeat, but her instinct is instantaneous and lethal calculation.
She instantly wants to travel to America to hunt Erin down and destroy her.
It sets up this really fascinating duality. Erin's mind is a prison she is desperately trying to escape, while Shevaun's mind was an impenetrable fortress that has just been breached from the inside.
Exactly. But Shevaun isn't the only supernatural being in this story.
No, and Erin's hometown of Boston is actually crawling with mythical factions playing a very dangerous game.
Right, let's dive into the ecology of the supernatural underground hiding in plain sight in Massachusetts.
Because it exposes a completely different kind of institutional failure. We have to look at the two non-human anchors in Erin's life.
First is Sassy, or Sherwood James Cash.
Erin met him 3 years prior in the psych ward. He was diagnosed as a compulsive liar and pyromaniac, always telling these grandiose stories about international espionage.
But the reality is that Sassy is a Bacana, which is a hyena shapeshifter.
And his history is a damning indictment of the supernatural infrastructure in this world.
It really is. He was human-raised, completely unaware of his own biology.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Very. The biological imperative of a Bacana is deeply tied to the lunar cycle. When Sassy hit puberty, his body fundamentally demanded to transform during the full moon.
But because he lacked the instinctual or cultural knowledge of how to shift, the physical and psychological pressure became just catastrophic.
The text makes a horrifying note about this. Human-raised Bacana who can't shift will literally tear their own skin off trying to relieve the pressure.
Wow. So at 14, unable to endure the agony and thinking he is going completely insane, Sassy attempts suicide.
Yes. And that is what lands him in the human psych ward with Erin.
And this is where the systemic negligence really occurs.
Right, because there's a global supernatural organization called Single Earth.
They operate under fronts like chivalry psychiatric.
And they exist ostensibly to protect and educate magical beings to help them coexist with humanity.
But Single Earth was entirely aware of Sassy's presence in that human hospital. A doctor recognized his biology and filed a report.
And what did he do? A bureaucrat reviewed the file, slapped the label on him that said safe enough in current location, and misfiled his case.
For 2 years, they left a suicidal teenager in a padded cell, pumping him full of human tranquilizers that further repressed his biological needs, all because of a paperwork error.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals Single Earth not as a sanctuary, but as an administrative monolith.
Exactly.
They prioritize systemic order over individual suffering. Sassy's hatred for them is entirely justified.
Single Earth sounds less like a magical sanctuary and more like a paternalistic corporate HR department.
That is spot on.
They preach peace and education, but their primary function is just liability management. And we see the human equivalent of this systemic categorization when Erin encounters Marissa.
Right, Marissa, her seemingly normal fencing friend who happens to be a Mistari tiger shapeshifter.
Let's talk about the hallucination in the woods, because this is a masterclass in psychological conditioning.
Marissa receives devastating news about her family's death. She runs into the woods in a state of profound grief, and Erin follows her to comfort her.
And Erin stands there and literally watches Marissa physically transform into a massive tiger.
Now, if you or I saw a tiger materialize in the Massachusetts woods, we would fundamentally question our reality.
Yeah, I'd be running for my life, but I'd also be thinking magic is real. But Erin has been so thoroughly conditioned by her psychiatric framing that she immediately gaslights herself.
She assumes her schizophrenia has returned in full force.
She flees and takes an emergency panic attack pill. The medical framework she relies on literally forces her to deny undeniable objective reality.
Because if the tiger is real, the entire framework she uses to survive collapses.
And what's critical about Marissa is that she isn't just a random shapeshifter living in the suburbs. She is from a tribe of Mistari exiles who operate as hunters.
And not just any hunters.
Right. They are the exact family of hunters who ambushed Shevaun with Firestone shotguns in France.
Which means Erin is standing dead center in the middle of an ideological and physical supernatural war zone.
On one side, you have independent survivors like Sassy who absolutely despise institutions.
On the other, you have Single Earth trying to manage the board from the shadows.
And then you have brutal independent magic users like the Triste Coven and Pandora who train students with fatal methods.
The lines are drawn. But the crucial question is, how did a heavily medicated 16-year-old human girl get caught in the exact epicenter of this supernatural crossfire?
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to examine the inciting incident, the 16-year-old original sin.
Adjila eventually reveals the truth to Erin and Sassy in a Boston basement.
16 years ago, Shevaun and Adjila were ambushed in Boston by high-caliber hunters using poisoned Firestone bolts.
Shevaun took catastrophic hits to the stomach and throat. She was dying.
And acting on sheer, unadulterated survival instinct, the dying vampire grabbed the nearest mortal she could find on the chaotic street and fed.
She used the human blood to rapidly heal her massive tissue damage.
But she didn't realize until she was already draining the woman that there were 2 heartbeats.
Right. The woman was pregnant.
The visceral horror of that moment is profound. Shevaun is a killer, certainly, but she operates with a very specific moral architecture.
Horrified by what she had done, she drops the dying woman in absolute revulsion.
And Adjila, arriving moments later, makes a drastic split-second decision to save the infant. He forcefully channels his Triste magic into the baby.
He shoves his magic into the infant to keep it alive until paramedics arrive. The baby lived and became Erin.
But I need to unpack the mechanics of this, because channeling magic sounds a little too clean. How exactly does a witch's power permanently weld a human infant's mind to an ancient vampire's?
We have to conceptualize the psychic immune system, right?
Yeah.
A mental firewall that naturally develops to protect individual consciousness.
Sure, humans have a natural defense.
But in a neonate, a newborn, that firewall is incredibly fragile, practically non-existent.
So Adjila didn't just gently pour energy into the baby.
No, his magic acted as a brutal, invasive force that artificially stabilized the failing biological systems.
And because Shevaun's vampiric energy and blood were the immediate cause of the trauma.
Adjila's magic inadvertently used Shevaun's magical resonance as the blueprint to rebuild the infant's failing neural pathways.
Wow. So the unfiltered magic didn't just save Erin, it fundamentally broke her natural psychic defenses and permanently bridged her mind with Shevaun's.
Precisely. It forged a permanent parasitic neural network, bridging her brain to the vampire's consciousness.
And this revelation completely recontextualizes the psychological bleed we discussed earlier. It is not a one-way street of a vampire possessing a human.
The emotional transference goes both ways.
Like Erin's deep-seated hatred of her own hair.
Right. She constantly keeps it cropped short, feeling an intense subconscious wrongness when she looks in the mirror.
Because Shevaun, who has a huge vanity for her long, flowing auburn hair, projects her own dysmorphia across the link whenever she senses Erin's short hair.
But the most devastating example of this subconscious bleed is the photo album.
Oh, this part broke me. Shevaun breaks into Erin's house and finds a meticulously laminated photo album.
Every picture of Erin with other people has been shredded and carefully taped back together.
But the very first page, the only photograph of Erin's mother, has been torn into microscopic pieces by a determined, meticulous hand.
It wasn't Erin who tore it. It was Shevaun.
When Shevaun would occasionally surface in Erin's body during her childhood, she was confronted with the physical photograph of the woman she murdered.
Driven by an ancient, suffocating guilt, the vampire shredded the photos.
And Erin, waking up from the fugue state with no memory of the act, absorbed a profound, crushing guilt that didn't actually belong to her.
She would weep as she taped the pieces back together. This completely subverts the standard possession trope.
Because how does a teenager process the reality that the voice in her head is both her lifelong tormentor and her mother's murderer?
Amazingly, because Erin shares Shevaun's memories, she intimately feels the vampire's genuine horror and self-hatred over the event.
Right. Shevaun avoids churches out of a deep sense of divine rejection. She calls her fledglings her daughters to compensate for the mother she destroyed.
Erin realizes she cannot even properly hate her abuser because she knows exactly how much the abuser hates herself.
It is a paralyzing emotional paradox, and it totally sets the stage for the inevitable physical collision.
Because with this secret finally unearthed, the fragile distance between Boston and France completely collapses.
The two minds are about to occupy the exact same physical space. Shevaun and Adjila have arrived in Boston.
Shevaun even stalks Erin's house. She sees the Picasso and Dali posters, which she finds incredibly tacky because she prefers Michelangelo.
She sees the meticulously restored photo album, and then the encounter happens right after Erin goes on a dinner date with Sassy.
Sassy has finally dropped the compulsive liar act and is trying to warn her about his true nature in the supernatural world.
But outside the restaurant, they are intercepted by Adjila. And Adjila's methodology here is highly indicative of his character.
He wants to test the connection. He grabs Erin and kisses her.
Okay, I am pushing back hard on Adjila's status as the calm, insightful witch here.
Oh, absolutely.
From a purely scientific perspective, his methodology is atrocious.
It's completely unethical.
Kissing a heavily medicated, psychologically fragile teenager on the street just to see what happens to her brain. It's not just reckless, it's malpractice.
Right.
It's like throwing a lit match into a fireworks factory just to study the chemical composition of the explosion.
It demonstrates a staggering lack of ethics. He does not view Erin as an autonomous human being. She is merely a vessel containing his lover.
And his reckless experiment works. The familiar sensory input of his touch bypasses the chemical suppressants, and Shevaun's mind violently yanks control of the physical body.
Shevaun instantly recognizes Sassy as a Picana.
And she wants to test out the capabilities of this human form against a shapeshifter.
But Sassy intervenes with one of the most brilliant tactical moves in the entire narrative.
Yes, he knows he cannot defeat a 500-year-old warrior in a physical fight, even if she is handicapped by a human body.
So he doesn't use magic. He forces the Shevaun-possessed Erin to swallow a massive dose of Erin's human anti-anxiety medications.
This raises an important question, right? How do ancient supernatural beings cope with modern science?
It is a brilliant subversion. Shevaun possesses vast knowledge of history, art, and multiple languages, but she has absolutely no understanding of 21st century psychopharmacology.
It's the ultimate culture clash. Sassy weaponizes big pharma against a vampire.
The tranquilizers rapidly cross the blood-brain barrier, and the immortal predator is effortlessly knocked unconscious by human chemistry.
But Sassy's quick thinking only buys them a little bit of time. The fallout of this encounter forces everyone out of the shadows.
It triggers a desperate race to claim Erin.
Because when Erin wakes up the next morning, the pharmacological haze clears, and she realizes the previous night was not a schizophrenic hallucination.
The terror of that realization drives her to seek refuge in the only system she knows how to navigate.
A panicked Erin calls her dad and checks herself into the local human psychiatric hospital.
She runs back into the cage because she believes the cage is the only thing that can protect her from the monsters.
Which leads us into the cascading institutional failures and hidden agendas that define the climax.
Right, Erin is seeking safety in a human medical system, but that system has already been compromised by the magical bureaucracy.
Dr. Isaac Francisco from Chivalry Psychiatric, the Single Earth Front, strides right into her hospital room, completely dismissing the human doctors.
He diagnoses her with, quote, acute psychorrhea.
Which isn't a real human medical term.
No. He cites her premature birth and hypoxia as the trigger for latent magical abilities and insists she must be transferred to a Single Earth facility.
The overlap of medical and magical gaslighting here is profound. Single Earth uses the authority of human medicine to enforce their supernatural jurisdiction.
But how did Dr. Francisco even know she was there?
This is where the catastrophic web of miscommunication completely unravels. Let's trace the thread back.
Weeks ago, Alexander, a Triste witch, studying under the terrifying master, Pandora, leaked Erin's file to Marissa.
Right, he hoped Single Earth would intervene and fix Adjila's 16-year-old mistake.
But Marissa, the Mistari tiger, saw Shevaun's name and panicked because of the vampire's lethal reputation.
She decided Single Earth was too slow and incompetent to handle it, so Marissa bypasses the bureaucracy and contacts her exiled, militant tiger family instead.
And her Mistari family flew to France and attempted to assassinate Shevaun with Firestone to protect Erin.
Which is the exact event that forced Adjila to suppress Shevaun's magic, creating the vacuum that yanked Erin's consciousness into the vampire's body in the first place.
It is a perfectly closed loop of systemic failure. The Triste witches, the Mistari hunters, the Single Earth bureaucracy, every single faction operated in absolute secrecy.
Convinced their specific ideology was the correct one.
Their compartmentalization and lack of transparency created a massive, bloody pileup.
And all these factions are now converging on the human hospital. Adjila doesn't even bother with diplomacy this time.
He physically breaches the psychiatric ward. He uses magic to short-circuit the electronic locks and puts the entire nursing staff to sleep.
He kidnaps the unconscious Erin directly from her hospital bed and forces Sassy to come with them to a basement safe house.
We really have to evaluate Sassy's perspective here, because he is the only one acting as a true advocate for the human being.
Totally. Single Earth wants to conscript Erin into their political structure to save her.
Adjila wants to cleanly sever the connection to save his lover, completely indifferent to what it might do to the teenager.
But Sassy's the only one who recognizes that Erin just wants to be normal, who truly has her best interests at heart.
Unfortunately, Sassy is drastically outgunned. Adjila sets up in the safe house, intending to surgically sever the magical link.
But you can't just uncouple two minds that have been structurally fused for 16 years without breaking something.
The psychic architecture is too deeply intertwined. They don't just share a connection, they share a load-bearing psychological foundation.
And the execution goes catastrophically wrong. Before Adjila is even ready to initiate the severance, Erin and Shevaun accidentally make physical contact.
The moment their skin touches, it creates an infinite sensory feedback loop.
Oh man, what happens?
Imagine placing two microphones directly next to each other in front of a speaker. The frequency escalation is instantaneous and deafening.
The physical and mental clash is devastating. Shevaun looks at Erin, and instead of seeing a 16-year-old girl, she sees 1,000 fragmented reflections of her own existence.
The sheer volume of the psychic noise causes Shevaun to completely panic.
Operating on pure blind instinct, she lashes out with the full kinetic force of a vampire. She flings Erin across the room.
The physical damage is catastrophic. Erin impacts the wall with enough force to crush her spine, fracture her skull, and puncture her lungs.
It is a definitively lethal injury for a human body. But the horror of this moment transcends the physical damage.
Because the psychic link is wide open, Shevaun actually feels the impact.
Right. For a 500-year-old apex predator who hasn't experienced true physical vulnerability in centuries, feeling a human spine shatter as if it were her own is completely mind-breaking.
The trauma completely unschools Shevaun's sanity. She flees the safe house in a state of absolute psychosis, leaving Erin bleeding out on the floor.
Adjila is forced into another split-second triage. He unleashes his Triste magic to rapidly knit Erin's bones and tissue back together, stabilizing her physical form.
But while the flesh is repaired, the sudden, violent trauma completely shatters Erin's psychic infrastructure.
We transition from physical trauma to profound psychological horror. Erin's physical body is stabilized in a coma, but her mind splinters.
Inside her consciousness, she falls into this massive dissociative landscape. She finds herself standing inside a melting, abstract cathedral.
The Dreamscape Church. This is such a brilliant visualization of intersectional trauma.
It is. The architecture of the church is a manifestation of Shevaun's deeply repressed religious guilt.
The stained glass is liquefying, the stone pillars are rippling, and scattered throughout this collapsing mental construct are hundreds of different fragmented versions of Shevaun.
It's the ultimate dead-eye defragmentation, but weaponized by magic.
Right. Every single time Shevaun surfaced in Erin's body over the past 16 years, a microscopic sliver of her personality broke off and remained lodged in Erin's subconscious.
And with the mental firewall entirely obliterated by the physical trauma, all those fragments have simultaneously awakened.
Erin is surrounded by Shevauns who are weeping, Shevauns who are fighting, arguing in ancient languages.
Meanwhile, in the physical world, Adjila manages to track down the primary consciousness of Shevaun.
He finds her hiding inside a literal Eastern Orthodox church in Boston, completely catatonic.
She's paralyzed by the human agony still bleeding through the link. He drags her back to the safe house.
And that's where Pandora, the ancient, terrifying architect of Triste magic, has finally arrived to assess the disaster.
And Pandora's diagnosis is chillingly precise. She calls it psychotic musical chairs.
What a phrase.
When Adjila tried to pull the minds apart, the hundreds of fragmented versions of Shevaun that Erin had absorbed over 16 years began fighting for a seat in reality.
So what does this all mean?
It forces us to examine the ultimate test of Erin's autonomy. Erin's physical survival is secured by magic, but her mental survival requires immense natural power.
Power that her medications have suppressed her entire life.
Exactly. Adjila's magical healing has completely flushed the drugs from her system.
To survive this catastrophic mental collapse, Erin cannot rely on pills or institutions. She must marshal her own innate psychological resilience.
The very power her doctors convinced her was a symptom of disease.
It's like pulling a corrupted USB drive out of a computer while it's actively transferring files.
That's a perfect analogy.
The data doesn't just stop, it shatters. Erin is standing in the middle of a hard drive crash of the human soul.
She has to navigate a collapsing mental cathedral and somehow silence 100 screaming fragments of an immortal predator.
And that is the absolute precipice this narrative leaves us on. With Erin trapped in a melting mental cathedral and a room full of squabbling supernaturals just staring at her comatose body.
They can manipulate flesh and energy, but they are entirely impotent to intervene in the psychological war raging inside her mind.
It brings the thematic elements full circle with devastating clarity. The physical threats, the firestone, the fangs, the claws, they are entirely secondary to the profound terror of losing sovereignty over your own mind.
Erin's journey forces us to analyze the resilience required for a human psyche to bear the weight of an immortal's trauma without completely disintegrating.
Let's pull all these threads together. We began in the sterile, heavily monitored environment of a Massachusetts psychiatric ward, analyzing a medicated teenager trying to survive high school fencing.
And we systematically peeled back the layers of reality until we exposed a blood-soaked, magical underground.
Where ancient witches and exiled shapeshifters are basically battling over the architecture of her brain. This story brilliantly uses the tropes of urban fantasy to explore the very real horrors of medical gaslighting.
It investigates the weaponization of diagnostic frameworks, trauma, and the desperate search for bodily and mental autonomy.
We rely so heavily on institutions, right? We demand that doctors, experts, and diagnostic manuals tell us what is real and categorize what is broken about us.
But Erin's narrative is a visceral reminder of the sheer courage it takes to trust your own senses when the entire world insists you are crazy.
She was right. The diagnosis was wrong. The monsters were real.
And every institution, whether it was the human psychiatric establishment or the magical bureaucracy of Single Earth, ultimately failed her.
They viewed her either as symptom to be suppressed or a liability to be managed. They never viewed her as a human being fighting a war of attrition inside her own head.
The only genuine advocacy came from individuals like Sassy, who intimately understood the terror of biological and psychological alienation.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling final thought for you to mull over. We have analyzed how Erin absorbed Shevaun's combat skills, languages, and ancient guilt.
We have watched Shevaun become entirely paralyzed by the sudden influx of Erin's physical vulnerability.
So if the walls of your own mind were suddenly torn down and you were forced to share your consciousness with an ancient apex predator, who would ultimately end up changing who?
It is a terrifying question of psychological osmosis.
Would the monster become irreversibly humanized by the exposure to mortal fragility? Or would the human learn how to harness the predator's instinct and bite back?
It asks us to define where our trauma ends and where our true identity begins.
Think about that the next time you hear a voice in your head. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the labyrinth of the mind. Keep questioning the frameworks that define your reality, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.